Just signing into the Zoom, as most people join us there. But there was a pretty cool add-in for OBS that allows me to grab each person's camera and do a better job of mixing them into the live stream. So let's see how we go. Alright, Zoom's not cooperating obviously today. Let's try that again. Zoom, sign in. There we go.
Recording in progress.
There we go. All right. So, hello Roberto. It's good to see Roberto coming in. So we got a couple of folks in. John is here.
Hey
I know
guys.
he's been waiting. How's it going? Sorry, no video on the Zoom, but if you get the YouTube live stream, you can see what I'm putting up on there. Yeah, good to see everyone. I've been away for a bit. We've had a heat wave last week and a lot of work, so not much of a summer vacation, unfortunately. But yeah, hopefully your summers are going better than mine. And yeah, so do we want the camera on there? It's weird. OBS has resized all of my camera sizes and all that. So yeah, Infinidash. Anyone getting their certification? So yeah, it's quite funny how I've seen some responses, at least one response of someone saying, "What the hell is this Infinidash from AWS and its certification?" Some great responses from random people as to what it is, that it does everything, does the scaling, and just a real good patchwork of buzzwords to encapsulate what Infinidash would be if they made it. Should probably we should probably make an open source version and start to talk about that. I don't really have much of an agenda for today's meetup. It's just been a while since we had one because of everything that's going on. We were on fire here for a while, which was not good. I just make sure that I have the chat from YouTube here so I can answer questions if someone has something actually important to ask. So yeah, type stuff into the chat on YouTube. If you're listening on YouTube, I have a separate window to look at that. And if you're part of the crew that's actually joining the meetup, you can just raise your hand or unmute yourself, and that we can just have a chat. But if you're shy, feel free to type a message in on the chat on YouTube. Interesting. Usual suspects are not here, which is interesting, but they're probably on vacation, which is the majority of people that signed up for the meetup, which is okay. Oh gosh, what to report? Yeah, we had some really
Hey, Adam.
nice. Oh,
This
hey.
is Roberto.
Hey, Roberto, how are you?
A quick question. I'm
Yeah.
just wondering what you're seeing out there as far as adoption and how people are doing and incorporating event modeling. What are you hearing?
Event modeling is taking off. I've been tracking just the traffic to the site for a while, and it looks like it's being used as a reference. There's a lot of hits on it that are specifically looking for event modeling. So in terms of someone going back to look at the main article to kind of see the guidance there, which I do have to update. I think the translation pattern has to be more fully explained. But there's been an incredible amount of adoption for it, and with larger and larger companies, which is great. I have actually a really good, what's it called? Quote from someone in the event modeling Slack group earlier today, where they're taking advantage of the fact that if they do an event model, they provide so much value to someone in their company by getting everyone on the same page and understanding what the system's going to do incredibly quickly. So I want to find that quote actually, since you brought it up. But yeah, the adoption's been quite large, and so there's been interest from a lot of different conferences around the world to have me present the concept. And it's really nice. It's really me that's promoting it out there, no one else, and I'm not really paying for any ads or anything like that, except maybe if we have a strong push to some workshops or something like that. But other than that, it's an organic growth, and it's been giving people ideas. Actually, the largest growth, Roberto, has been in traditional systems. So even though we have events in our blueprint, people are using it for just getting concepts across to a larger group of people, even if they're not doing event sourcing or CQRS or any kind of event-based architectures. The storyboard aspect is it in itself is not new, but I think the concept that it is fundamentally a really good source of truth for requirements is starting to move that in. And I think because it's tied back to solid concepts of event sourcing and small scale all the way through to very, very large scale, and those being able to express those concepts to more of the organization rather than just usually the technical side, it's organically growing. So we've had as always, we're refining kind of how to present and how to do the workshops on it. It's certainly changed in the format, especially with online versus in person, but it's got the same motivation behind it, that core aspect of state and the views of what people are seeing expressed with that tie into actual events on a timeline speaks to a lot of people. So I definitely haven't seen the opposite. So I think one of the biggest benefits is the fact that it replaces so many other tooling and processes and methods, because when you don't have time, or you don't have time to hire people and you don't have budget, you need to do more with less. And sometimes that used to be done, just have the developers hack through whatever they thought we said. So I think event modeling is just the next logical step of what is the one thing that would give us some formality, some process, some design without going overboard, needing to incorporate 5 different processes or notation styles or activities or meetings or whatever. So it's been really the kind of Swiss Army knife of answering the most questions that any project really has to ask. And when I say any project, really what I've been focusing on is just business information systems automation. So if you're going to be a R&D company and you're working on some algorithms or some quantum computing problems, I don't think it's going to be as valuable for you. But more mundane problems that are out there, 99% of the software that's written is for fairly mundane. Move information from A to B, present information, things like this. That's the part that needs to be fixed first. So it's kind of like the Linus Torvalds approach, where you don't want to be the dreamer trying to invent new things and be clever and be a visionary. Linus Torvalds wants to fix the pothole right in front of him instead of falling in it. He's not got his head up in the sky to think of brand new novel ideas. He's an engineer. He himself said that he's more of an Edison than a Tesla. He just wants to fix things and practice engineering principles rather than be clever and make new things. Remember, his whole thing was about just bringing what existed for very expensive university systems to home computing. So it was a real problem that didn't really need any, ingenuity or invention. It just needed elbow grease and hard work, and take that concept and implement it from scratch on a smaller scale that would work on home computers. So in the same way, here we're not trying to invent a really new excellent novel thing for designers or UX. We're not trying to design anything novel for programmers. We're trying to just get the simplest thing. The biggest problem that's never really been solved in software is getting everyone on the same page, from business and tech. And I say that with a caveat, because there was legitimate reasons for business and tech not to be on the same page in the early days of computing, because computers could do so little, and it was really just still trying to figure out the best way to use them. So that business application was much further removed than it is now. So yeah, I hope that makes sense. I see Rick made it in. Good to see you, Rick. It's been a while. Hope you're enjoying your...
Yeah, it has been a while.
So, yeah. The question while you jumped in was, what have we seen with event modeling adoption? And it's been quite a uptick through, especially COVID, when the concept in Miro and ONote and other things were basically done quite I guess quite often, and as the replacement for in-person collaborations and things like that. So that's definitely given us a huge, this community at least, a huge boost. And the favorite thing, event storming out there, that was the #1 thing on the ThoughtWorks Tech Radar in 2018 or whatever, or 2017 maybe. I forget now. I think it was 2017. But anyway, it made the top thing on the Tech Radar from ThoughtWorks. Their battle cry or motto was, if you can have it in person compared to anything online, spend the price on the tickets to fly everyone there to have them in person. Well, as soon as COVID hit, then people that went in full 2 feet in based on that recommendation we're all of a sudden stranded with very little usable, you know, kind of process to do that, because the in-person disappeared, and the number one thing that was recommended was no longer was no longer possible due to the flight restrictions and just getting in-person meetings done at all. So
Yeah.
so that, if you look at event storming, but then you see event modeling and the fact that it kind of came out of the same group of people, with events being as the central benefit of being able to elaborate on what things are happening. I think there was a large portion of the audience, and I keep seeing that people have started out with event storming, but moved to event modeling because they found that they had way more guidance deep into the project, and event storming again primarily was a beginning. It was a one-day exercise to get discussions going. It was never meant to be at the beginning something that was going to be used as a blueprint, because rightfully so, Alberto said that it's business changes, so there's it's kind of bad, and I agree with him, to keep one abstraction or one set of ideas from one date as something that's going to guide you. But that's, at the other end of the extreme, you have the fact that you still need some guidance. You can't keep everyone up to date about everything, and all the best abstractions all the time. It's just too fluid. You'll never actually write anything. You'll always be discussing what's best. So event modeling is what was that piece as well that was more permanent. It was something that ended up having a blueprint there for you to use, and it was long lived. And so yeah, it took. People have different opinions. Different organizations have different needs, and there was definitely a large portion of the tech community out there that were actually looking for things that were blueprints. They were looking for a more usable version of UML, which meant that it could be used by more people, but it still allowed you to design, and it could incorporate more people into the design. So that I think, that's actually a really good question, because it's kind of a retrospect. What Roberto asked is that we're kind of coming out of COVID, at least here. The restrictions were lifted yesterday for into stage 3. Stage 4 is really everything. All recommendations are entirely off, and that's going to be in September. And Canada managed to be the highest vaccinated country, surprisingly, after kind of getting shafted for the shipments because we don't produce it here.
Well, with single shots, you guys still got a lot of second shot to catch up on.
I got my second shot. I already suffered with my second shot last week. So.
What I'm saying, but we're still catching up on this stuff. So we're not highest vaccinated.
Well, I think we were on one of those statistics. Statistics are great. You can make up whatever you want to be true, right?
They were going on since they were only giving people first vaccine.
We bent the numbers somehow to make Canada the number 1 for vaccinations. So I was very proud at that point. That was good.
That's right. Exactly. Take advantage of those evil statisticians.
Exactly. So, Rick, before you joined, I just said that it's been too long since we had a meetup because of various reasons, busy, heat wave, whatnot, that it's nice to get together again and just have a short one. I have a demo for one of our clients coming up. So this client's just started an incredibly large event modeling project. It's like I said, it's still going on, and what I'm finding out right now is really what we need from ONote. I'm trying to wedge into Miro. So some of the challenges as we scale event modeling to large proportions, where usually you would have one product owner, we've scaled that up to having, I guess, 10 plus product owners working off of 4 Miro boards right now, because logistically there's too much information on the event model in one Miro board that it slows down. And so far the largest project up to that point has been 3 Miro boards, I think, just because of the uh, limitations of what a browser can display on the average user's screen, and so you know ONote will fix a lot of that because it doesn't have, at least the new version doesn't have that canvas limitation of basically trying to encapsulate a drawing. It's a layout of more of a grid layout, because that's what you have with swim lanes and vertical slices. If you think of those two concepts, they really are best served by a grid of some sort. Not necessarily showing all the lines on the grid, but in terms of arrangement, it makes perfect sense. So this, actually, Rick, for your perspective in terms of running projects and getting requirements done properly, this latest large project has shown where you can find more subject matter experts, SMEs, to act like product owners on an as-needed basis. And so that collaboration, we're finding out exactly how to do that properly at scale. Kind of how Kent Beck scaled Agile properly at Facebook. We're finding out how to scale event modeling properly in non-trivial sized companies. So it's been wonderful. So a lot of the bottlenecks that we saw with for whose neck do I chop if this goes wrong, who are the stakeholders, that kind of stuff has been really looked at more responsibly, more granularly, because I think we're looking at components and parts of the workflow. We can look at services and swim lanes and assign on a much more granular basis, as we wish, who the people are that are responsible for giving those requirements. So compared to a traditional management structure, we've kind of opened up more paths in from management and ownership all the way to implementation, instead of just having this one kind of like hourglass shape where you kind of have a squeeze in the middle from what do the users want, what does upper management want, and you kind of squeeze through the product owner, agile coach, all these different roles. There's only a handful of people that are really trying to make sure that this is organized, and so then the fan out to all the developers is done properly.
Yeah.
So essentially what we
what I hear
found is that it
basically-
doesn't. Let me just finish the thought, and then we'll get to you.
some
So the idea here is that we haven't actually found that there's a lot more total effort being done, but that the effort is distributed in part-time basis to a wider range of people. And some might say, well, that looks like you don't need a PM, or you don't need an agile coach, or you really don't need a product owner. You still do, but the rules are much better defined, where you can organize that to a much better efficiency of use of each person's time. And so this project as well is very ambitious in terms of how much has to be done. And so it actually does require agile practices, because we want to get 1,000, we want to have that 9 ladies, giving birth to 1 child in 1 month, right? We actually want to do that. So that takes a lot of parallelization. It takes a lot of design and collaboration to be on the same page. So it's been really good. It's one of those things that's going to continue to be exercised with larger and larger clients, and it would be a really good addition to the book. And this is my problem, that I'm always getting really awesome new experiences and ideas to tack on yet another chapter. So I'm hoping that maybe this is just a version, a revision 2 or something, or an appendix, or maybe do a series of publications. The way it's going, it looks like it's a shift in the industry, so I don't think the event modeling book will really be the one and only to look at. I think there'll be a series of books that maybe focus in on some of those things, maybe how to scale it as opposed to what's traditionally done, and to have the pros and cons and the adjustments that are needed and how to do them. Sorry, Rick, I'm done now. You can start.
Okay. Sorry, yeah, I thought so. Okay, so it sounds like the one of the takeaways. You got a couple things there. One of the takeaways is you started to discover, which in small projects you didn't need, but on the bigger projects you realize is adding some notation or some things to identify areas of explicit responsibility and ownership or interest. So say we care about this part of the system, these questions come to us. We care about this part of the system, so these questions come to us. So it's very clear who to collaborate with or who to ask questions on. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, the other advantage is that it's a well-established problem solution space, which is insurance. So when you're talking about underwriting, well, you can look at the structure um, of the client's organization and see who the people are that would have underwriting as part of their knowledge, and you say, well, which one of you is going to be the one we can bug? And so likewise with payments and maybe some regulations, you definitely can find those people. So it's also a more natural way of doing things, because I think traditionally what you would have is you'd have a product owner and then they would go and pester those people in each part and kind of go away and help with the event model themselves, almost like a full-time job. However, it's so accessible, and instead of just having the expense of having another person involved, having that subject matter expert's involvement directly on the event model removes that broken telephone game. And so, I wanted to get back to one thing, Rick, in terms of the benefits of Agile stuff, because this has been, we want it yesterday kind of project, and it's huge. So the idea of Scrum and things like that they're, I keep repeating this when we discuss Agile on here, is that these are, these tactics are from these war room like situations where you need that daily stand up, and you need to know where everyone is at every single point to keep moving as fast as possible or as efficiently as possible, and not lose anything. But that state of emergency, I say all the time, is not healthy. And so some of these capital A Agile processes and things are not good to have in there forever. However, but in this case, there is a real, project emergency, if you will. And so we've adopted, because there's so many subject matter experts, we've adopted what are called war rooms, and they're basically one day that's set aside per week to have everyone with an expectation that there will be certain subjects up for grabs to be discussed, and people should be in those rooms. They might not need to be there 100% of the time. They might have to do a few things here and there to get their daily work done. But for the most part, one day is basically made to be available for everyone to get information from all of these subject matter experts and not rely on any kind of bottleneck for information. So that opens up the floodgates to that. And what the event model does in that case is that it documents what was actually talked about. And so what we did is found that adding a little bit more, not gatekeeping, but at least an approval process where you can say that, okay, it showed up on the event model during the war room session with a subject matter expert. We still want someone that does have hold of the budget, knows what the statements of work are, to actually say that this part of the event model is correct. We need this. You can assume that you need this to be built, and therefore you have budget, and everyone is on the same page that no one's going to be mad at anyone that it got developed and how it got developed and what was the goal of it and what information went through it, etc. What the event model gives you. So it's been really good for that level of transparency, and I think it's really what's hindered a lot of projects in a state of emergency before, is that the only avenue to be on the same page with everyone was meetings, and it was very verbal, and there was really no set notation for how you communicate as much as you can, and therefore got dispersed through wikis or multiple different role-specific diagrams, sequence diagrams for technical people, had mock-ups for designers, project management things, and burn down charts for the coaches and team leads, and it was very dispersed. And so having everything in one place is really the only way you can do that. You really start to see the total cost of ownership of process, tools, and even ideas and concepts in different people's roles. So it's been really good to see, the sort of validation with real money, real projects at scale, and we're talking, very large projects. They're not trivial. This is millions of dollars, and so I just see more and more places, especially large institutions, going to that with a huge bonus benefit that it is incredibly lightweight for just startups. And when you start to find something that works at all these different levels, and all you're doing is changing infrastructure rather than your state transitions as you scale up, it's wonderful. So that's kind of how it's in where I think agile, even some capital A agile practices are applicable. It's nice to see how event modeling gives you a way to reinforce that collaboration and communication.
Right, and I think that's the key thing is shaping your communication artifacts appropriately for the situation. So and that's where the agile stuff is much more around the people coordination rather than the artifact coordination.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where people missed it. Like they would get around the scrum and the board and whatever they just chose to focus on, and all the artifacts of the information artifacts, right? That they just blindly copied from someone else. But it's really about you're having specific issues due to the situation you're in, the scale, the collaboration, the where stakeholders are available. And so you're finding that these agile practices, because you don't have everybody in a room and they're all kind of dedicated to that project full time, and you can make those budget decisions in the same meeting that you make the design decisions, right?
Well, it actually isn't done in the same. I mean, it's pushed off to
Right.
when those people are done, but you have a record of what was discussed, and sometimes it may be refined or just outright said this is not in scope, and maybe one of the SMEs was, thinking, next milestones for next year, and
Right.
it had to
So-
be pushed back.
So you develop some appropriate procedures for this context. It's not something you couldn't cookie cut exactly what you're doing to any other context. You'd have to adjust. But I want to point out, when getting to that, the way the event modeling as an information architecture, and it doesn't force down into technical architecture, right? And it doesn't force up into having that middle ground, the information architecture. If you mark it up properly, and if you do the scale, what you're discovering is practical way for yourself with these notations to, instead of scaling up the system, right,
Mm-hmm.
you're scaling down the problem. And that's the key thing, is when you find those information boundaries, what you're really doing is, if you can actually start looking at what you're doing that you've discovered organically as kind of an obvious thing to do. But now maybe take it a little more explicitly going forward. We're just saying what we're doing is scaling down the problem. This area here is a subset of the problem. And now that we've taken this bigger problem and broken it down into subsets,
Mm-hmm.
we can have people who fully own this subset of the problem. And because the way the event modeling architecture sits, where you have these clearly defined service boundaries, right?
Mm-hmm.
Handoff between this part of the problem and that part of the problem becomes clear. And that allows these people within that boundary they know the handoffs, they know the expectations of the external system is visible to them. They could look down the line and see their long-term impact of that. Well, where does that
Yeah.
use? They can actually own the system because the visibility of the boundaries and the visibility of the impact of where is that event used later and
Yeah,
how is it, so they actually, it gives them the visibility they need to
exactly.
properly. And I think that's, I
Yeah,
think
there's
it's
a whole lot of there that you uncovered, Rick. I mean, there's navigatability, discovery, visibility, right? There's all of these abilities that are cranked up, if
right.
you will.
So this is one of the things that, like, when I work with people, I really take a more explicit approach to this and try in their context and really try and get them and coach them, you know, kind of shepherd them until they look at the system that way. Because once you do and you take that explicit approach to, you can scale down the system, right? And say this is
Hmm.
sub problem. And it's, as long as it handles this part well and follows these rules, the rest of the system can rely on it and trust it. As long as it behaves externally this way, and we can see that, then we can trust it and make decisions based on that. And we don't have to have these gigantor decision meetings all the
Hmm.
time, right? And redesign the whole system every time somebody has an issue, right?
Yeah.
We can talk about that in context. Well, how will that impact me? Like, well, should we do this or that? Well, this depends. How's that going to impact me? Let's walk it through, right? They can
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
do that.
You can do
And
that
the people
audit. Yeah.
and the people from the two sides, the people that are making the change and the people who are down the line impact from the change, can sit together, walk it through, and say, well, if you do that, this is how it's going to impact me. And if you do that, this is how it's going to impact me. And they'll say, either there's no difference to me, so I don't care, or wait a minute, there is a big difference to me. Um, so, and they might actually say, but I see that that's going to save us 3 months. So what I'll do is I'll mitigate it over here because that's worth it for our project, but I'll take the hit.
Hmm.
And when I know that I'm doing it and I know why I'm taking that hit, right?
Yeah.
And that's an important thing. And they're like, why are we doing this strange thing? Well, because that part of the system, it's better for that part of the system to do it that way. It's more clean. But that means there's a whole design, an intermediate system we'd have to put in place to make a better mapping. And you know what? We don't have that time to do that yet, right?
Right. Right.
And we can do that in the future and we can adapt later. So they can make these kind of decisions more holistically together. And then they can basically say, here's what we've chosen. We ran into this issue. We looked at these options, and here's what we chose
Yeah.
and why we chose it. And they can hand that to the budget decision makers for approval. Instead of calling a meeting and say, what should we do? They say, we've analyzed it, and here's our recommendation, and here's the
Right.
other option we chose. Now, the budget people say, like, they're not stuck with, well, here's what we're going to, either what should we do, but they don't have the information to decide. And so, but they're forced to decide, which is the most dangerous thing we do.
Right.
It force people who have the budget concerns to decide stuff they don't have the information to decide correctly, and then look at them and say, "Why did you make such a crap decision?" That's the part of the stink in our system with a lot of software development methods and practices, even agile ones, right?
Yeah,
Where
exactly. I think everyone's best intentions, and you know what road that paves, are kind of a lot of times limited to the scope of their role. And so while it's great for that role, um, there is a net negative cost to the entire organization because there's a there's a pull to learn other things that you may not be comfortable with. I mean, event modeling is new to everyone, so I guess for now it's a it's an easy shareable cost, and it's not one group trying to win over another one. But I think with a lot of things that we had in the industry before, we definitely had that, not just the tech business silo problem, but then within each side, there's more silos created there. So there might be someone that's a huge advocate of BPMN notation. There might be another advocate of UML on the other location, the other side in tech on the architecture side. There might be someone that's really pushing for C4 because it's a lighter weight, component organization.
yeah,
The list goes on, and then on the agile side, there's people that are proponents of Scrum, there's Kanban, and there's the proponents of the mix, and then there's people that understand that you need to switch them around when needed, all sorts of things. But honestly, but what I've noticed is that they're more isolated. I think, and again, I think event modeling came out of the fact that we needed to do everything with projects that were small, that had budgets that were small, or timelines that were incredibly fast. And we, as a company starting up, we didn't have the pick of the best projects because we haven't been around. So for a lot of people, we were the last ones that would accept someone's project. And so we had to learn that kind of the hard way. How do we make this project a success? I don't have a I don't have budget to hire an agile coach. I don't have budget to hire a designer. I don't have budget to hire a DBA. I don't have budget to hire, and the list goes on. And and so you couldn't have those silos. Uh, and the nice thing is that we were not afraid to say yes to larger projects too with established companies, not just startups that almost always have those problems. So we were able to take the same kind of lessons about the mechanics of communication, and apply them to each of these companies of these sizes. And it was always, where there wasn't any. We're kind of, it kind of feels wrong now that we have the larger companies that have budgets. We kind of feel a bit like a fish out of water because we've been doing things without these other things. Like you have DevOps. Do you have a DevOps team? Do you have this? Like, well, we do that. We don't have someone that. Do you have a QA team? We do QA. So we have so many of these cross discipline approaches baked in to the very reason why event modeling needs to be useful to all of them.
We should put a caveat to the scale that you're talking about for people who are listening and might want to try and apply it to their business context. And I just want to always be very aware of the caveat, and that is the kind of scale and the kind of efficiency that Adam is talking about that you get from this event modeling and breaking down the problem works well. And look at the business context and talk about if you're really looking at like efficiency in developing the solution, right? Now, if you have
Well, yeah, you're always giving this caveat.
no, I just know this is an important caveat because people will blindly apply it and really
Yeah.
create accidents. So if you have high uncertainty in your business about the problem that's being solved, you have to approach it differently. I'm not saying you don't use event modeling. I'm saying you still use event modeling, but you have to use some other techniques with the business to really navigate. Because event modeling is great, but if you're saying I'm developing this and then it's like, wait a minute, I didn't even know if that's the problem we wanted to solve. What did the customers want? Like the thrash you'll create, yes, you can be more efficient in thrashing, but you'll steam ahead so quickly that in development that you'll actually be, oh great, we can, oh you know how to develop that, so go ahead, and then you'll spend a lot of cost on stuff where you could have done that like experiment.
Yeah, I'm going to disagree with you on a number of the things here because we had to do that with a ton of startups, right?
Sure.
So compared to other approaches, an event model, especially if you're doing event sourcing, is going to allow you to make those things not expensive, because pivoting, even if you have the entirely wrong idea and you start down a path of doing things in a way that isn't the best because you don't even know if that's the right problem, but you still have captured a number of things that may or may, you could be entirely wrong. You could be in an entirely different industry, but that no one can help you with that. What happens with an event modeling approach especially plus event sourcing, is that you have that ability to keep 80% of what didn't work instead of just 20. I think that's the biggest difference. Event sourcing, I thought, was the reason for that, and I think what the true reason is really the event model shows the coupling of data points and what has changed and what doesn't change and what affects what down the line. And so we've had more. I was telling, I think you weren't on the call yet, but someone was saying, how has event modeling gone for the last year or so since the pandemic? And the largest uptick that we've had in users is from traditional systems, nothing to do with event sourcing, which is great. That means the concept about thinking of state like this and thinking of the customer experience, user experience like this really does help a lot. And if people saw the Wardley mapping recording that I did, we have that problem space discussion, and we have basically changed the event model to be really zoomed out to have the problem space discussions from the perspective of where are we in the market? Are other people doing this? Which parts are we building? Which parts are we buying? Which parts are commodities? Which parts are going to be brand new experiments that are going to be quite expensive? And well, if you are building the wrong thing there, then yeah, maybe it is a waste of money. But we certainly have adopted event modeling to be more of the preliminary talks that you would have in the C suite level long before anything gets done. And it's sort of the same thing that event storming did the opposite direction, where they were talking about well, you just throw this away, we only talk about problem space and really it's a brainstorming exercise. They expanded that to have 2 more formats to have the implementation, etc., to do that. So the reason that we had to start with the solution space is because of those projects that we had. They weren't the best projects, and they were basically stuck at implementation, and we needed to have that as the first thing to get solved, because we were getting clients that needed a solution. They weren't getting further along with the previous vendors they were using, or they had a real hard time finding a vendor that would do it, and the only way to get out of that is really understand the a transparent way to show exactly what they're going to get for every penny that they spend. And of course this led to the fixed costs way of doing things, etc. So yeah, if you're totally off the mark and you're building the wrong thing because you think someone needs Google, well, they're not going to switch from Google to you, right? there's those things, but
those things, that's what I'm so hang on a second. I just want to be clear. That's exactly the point I'm talking about. It's not like if you want to ship features, whatever, but if you're in the wrong solution space, like you're not even solving the right problem for the customer you're targeting, right? Event modeling will help. Like event modeling helps you make, like when you say, I want to change my business decision from this to this, you can quickly look down and say, how does that impact my system? And like you said, well, 80% of my system's still the same, and this is the 20% we'd have to throw away and rebuild. It lets you tell. It basically makes that the impact of your decisions, your random business decisions, if we want to say, like you weren't involved in those discussions, so to you they're random, right? It makes the impact clear, right? And it likes and it's clear. You can walk through it with business people; they can see the impacts. So it lets you make those decisions with clarity. But I just want to be clear that if you're having those kind of situations, you need to get people involved who are doing some other tactics to make sure they get what is the problem we want to solve for the user, so that the people doing the event modeling and event storming, the people that are owning the solution, can recommend, well, this is the appropriate solution for that problem, right? And so in startups, you got to watch, like some people have got it nailed. They know because they lived the problem, so they kind of know, and they're used to whatever it is, those situations where they get lucky and they know enough about the actual problem to know that they've really got the core area right. In that case, they can experiment and navigate on the best solution to really meet that need.
Yeah.
But there are some caveats, and and I think it's important for people to realize that.
Well, I'll say that you'd go way further wrong if you did something instead of event modeling while still doing solution space before problem space. So I think what you're talking about is true.
That's what I'm getting to here.
Yeah.
Is that almost always in both of those situations, the people are going to come to you with the same thing. Can you design a solution that does this? And they're going to talk to you about the solution. And what event modeling allows you to do is just get that out quickly and clearly, and then talk about how does this impact the problem. And if you see those warning signs, you need to find the right person and get them involved to shift the problem space. So if you're working on small, like that's one of the things is it will allow you to see the alerts and the warning signs and just don't ignore them. Don't
Yeah,
skim away
yeah.
saying we can code our way out of it. But you can't code your way out of not understanding the customer's problem, right? Or not understanding the business problem.
Yeah,
You
you can
can't
build the
code your
wrong
way out of
things
that.
for sure.
So, and I think, but it allows you to make it visible enough to have that conversation. And the moment you see those early warning signs, that's our responsibility to find the right business stakeholder, make them aware of it, and let them have that discussion.
Yeah, I had an interesting discussion recently with a new startup that's in the sales space, and one of the interesting things that event sourcing actually exposes to help people with the problem space question is which parts of this are actually components that give you a competitive advantage or whatever, and if you're just doing inventory and payment and CMS, the source of truth doesn't exist with you. There's tools that already have that source of truth. So now you have a really difficult question as to which parts are you going to build. Is this just an entire cost center, and you don't really care about how this is done? Is this just a marketing ploy or whatever? So recently what I've been doing is making sure that people understand what they want, first of all, because we'll build whatever, but even something that's highly understandable by everyone. I actually adopted this internally because event sourcing can be done in spreadsheets easily. And so what I've said to people is say, okay, well, what's going to happen is going to have a bunch of records that are going to say what happened, no matter what your domain is. Make those, write those down in rows in your first sheet on your spreadsheet. If the rows have different types of information, make sure that you add extra columns for different types. Don't reuse one column for a separate for a different concept or value. And then make a second one and make derived values out of that. Make sure the first one's ordered. So I sneak in the fact that it has to be ordered. By that point, I'm making them think in stories without telling them to do so. Second sheet then has all the derived. Actually, this is a good topic for next time because I can show you a real example since I'm using it for our billing. It's event-sourced billing, but it's all done through spreadsheets. So if you have the first sheet ordered, you can have a lot of derived values that are one-to-one or cumulative because you have ordering that you can put into the second sheet, including some formulas even. Further, you can always add more information by adding more columns to the first sheet, and then the derived sheet can also expand, etc., and you won't have an issue. A third sheet basically adds both sides together. So yeah, usually depending on which spreadsheet you're using, sometimes it's harder to put information together without an intermediate pivot table or a well-organized accumulation of both of those derived and source values on a sheet. So then the next set of sheets is actually pivot tables, which give you a really good idea for all the different projections that you're going to have in an event source system, which is a true representation of information systems anyway. And so from those, then you have a set of pivot tables that always start at A1, so it's easier for them to grow and shrink. Don't put them into one sheet, even though you think it's going to be compact information or make it easier to look at. It makes a disaster for organization. And then the last sheets that you make are actually the screens that people will see. If this is probably one of the simplest things you could do to make sure that someone understands what they're trying to build. And almost everyone understands how an Excel spreadsheet works. And basically you can guide them through, and it's started to become almost like a pre-engagement activity with clients, especially startup clients with me. is that I can say, well, just write down what can happen in a spreadsheet. Every row gives me an occurrence of what you think the data will be that you're interested in. That makes your, this is event sourcing, but without talking about it. And then we can derive the screens and how that information shows up by going through those two intermediate sets of sheets that derive anything in between to help. Some of them are raw. They can just show the raw data with a simple if statement or whatever to make sure it's looking at the right type. But you bring them to that way of thinking at the very beginning. And moving from that to an event model. And I think Matt Bishop is also a guy that does this a lot, because we found the same thing. He was basically talking to people about representing the calculations in any system. Show me in a spreadsheet what you want. And basically what I was doing is I was coming from it that I need to do this anyway for my billing. I'll just have to have all these events for what people build out and all those things, and then make some pivot tables, and I'll be able to generate invoices very quickly, find out, get reports on how far we are, get all those burn down charts and percent completes very quickly. And it's working wonderfully. Side note on that, we kind of started talking about at the very beginning with why ONO is needed, because right now what I'm doing is I'm adding a whole bunch of extra data to the name of each command handler and read model. So that in Miro, when you export the whole Miro board as a SVG or I think it can be exported or made a backup into a JSON document, if you have one text field that has, for example, this is the command handler for register user, and then basically I can give it a namespace beforehand, so it could be like onboarding, like the onboarding workflow, or statement of work or project or component, right? Or subset of the workflow. So onboarding : register user, then I can put comma AD, and then when it's done I can put that dash done. Now if I'm doing that on the event model in Miro, and I have an automated process to back that up to an SVG or a JSON backup, I can then just use a command line utility like sed or grep and find all those values, and that will give me a per component percentage done. I can make burn down charts from a Miro board very easily, and further to that, because our billing is done in fixed costs, I can then have that automatically populate the regular activity tracking that each consultant does, and puts down which command handler they finished and the date and all that, right? Because I use that then to generate reports for clients, etc. But this is kind of a neat thing of how I'm using event sourcing concepts to automate what I'm doing internally for just to run my business, even though it's a well-established domain and I could just get FreshBooks or whatever and pay the price and whatnot. But the amount of control is great, because first of all, FreshBooks was not going to give me a really easy, like most people bill by time and materials, so I'm not going to have FreshBooks be well built for those things that I'm doing in terms of fixed cost on a very fine level like that. So anyway, that was kind of neat, and I only have about half an hour left, so I want to get through some more things. Here is a I didn't get the permission to put the person's name in, but this is kind of done in a public forum, so I can show, people were asking how things are going. Well, they are they're doing really well. Like, we have people posting, out of the blue, posting things like this. Hey you all, I wanted to let everyone know the awesome day I had. We are integrating a third party, and I was given the task of planning it out. I created a pretty thorough event model for it on a Miro board. Oh man, everyone was blown away. I never gotten so much immediate praise. I didn't even think much of it while I was building it out either. I got a couple of direct messages asking about it as well. Um, yeah, so hopefully they can push the adoption throughout the company. But this is the kind of thing that just makes people, realize how quickly you can get so much communication across, that people notice. Like if you're going to do event modeling, these are the reactions in most places. They're going to be able to say, wow, I understand how the thing's going to work. You can walk me through exactly what you're thinking, and it's also kind of the reason behind why winning a hackathon is easy if you're doing an event model. It gets everyone on the same page incredibly quickly, and you save so much time by not having to coordinate who's doing what, and having blockers because of dependencies, and not knowing what the outcome's going to be on the other side of what someone else is working on. So this little bit of design, I think, is what the industry was really missing, and so now we have it, and we have these kind of reactions. So I'm super happy that people are getting these kind of experiences out there, and it keeps me motivated, and keep working on anything that I can to keep things moving forward, and try and make as many clients of ours as happy as possible. It's we're starting to reach some scale problems. That's not a real problem, but we're slowly trying to carefully expand as we're getting out of COVID now. So there's a whole bunch of startups as well that want help, and our labs effort to basically have some equity for brand new companies that don't have funding, for people to help them. And so there's a big list of people. There's a number of projects that we have that can be unleashed. It just takes time to coordinate. So I've been gathering the names. People have been asking about how that's going to go, and so I'll be in touch with everyone that reached out about that. But especially if you have a startup idea, and you want to see how it goes, and if it's interesting enough, and enough people that are signed up to do these things, they'll do it all with event modeling and event sourcing. So a huge benefit there, and it just works on sweat equity, unfortunately, for people that want to get paid. But for people that are interested in the concepts, and they have jobs and other things to put food on the table, they can use this as a weekend project or an evening project, or maybe a hackathon at work with a few others. As long as they sign NDAs, they can then do that and learn all of this stuff on a real project. So anyway, really, really awesome to see these things. Oh yeah, so yeah, it's Berkeley Martinez that had that quote. So he's just now said that it's okay to give attribution to his to his name. So thank you, Berkeley, for sharing your experience, and I'm sure it's an indication of good things to come for the whole community here that's doing this. But yeah, so yeah, we got another half hour. If anyone wants to discuss anything else, I know that we had a number of topics in the Slack group here. Let me see if I can pick one out, unless you guys have some question. And no one's actually typing anything in YouTube, so that's okay. Everyone that wants to be here is in the actual meetup. We do have about 11 viewers, 6 viewers now. The YouTube live thing's never very, very popular, but then again, I don't really advertise it as much or do any of the fun click to subscribe and like down below crap that most people do on YouTube.
So what kind of topics are you thinking of in the next little while, or are people interested in? Maybe that's a good kind of.
Yeah, so I've started a list. One of the community members here from Event Driven Approaches, Chris Simpson, has ever since retiring from Plenty of Fish, He was their chief technical debt collector. He gave himself that title. But he did a lot after retiring. He quote unquote retiring. I think he's just taking a sabbatical. But he's younger than me, so I doubt he's retired. But he started an event sourced task tracker, but it's not a to-do list. It's really kind of a stack, and I'm not sure how much I can talk about it, but he has some beta users, and it's really for people with ADHD and other concentration problems to be able to get their tasks done during the week and not have a daunting to-do list. But the idea of a stack is that you only have one thing in front of you to do, kind of like a work in progress limit for a person. Should just be one if you're ADHD. And as you complete those things, the next one pops up, and you just have a number how many things are on the stack left. So you might have like a 9 in a circle, and it just says right now, water the plants or something. And so for folks like, and he's actually written about it quite extensively. If you look at Chris Simpson on LinkedIn, actually I could probably just do that right now. Let me see if I can find it. But anyway, I've adopted it myself, and I started to put in some of those things. So one of the topics that I'm going to do is really creating an event store that is the full stack of what you would deploy, meaning that you have a projection that spits out HTML essentially. So you go to that address, and that's what you get. And same with logging in and logging out. They're just events. And so then you have projections that can have things in there that would either show you need to relog in or even redirect. But essentially it's pushing everything into Event Store. It's kind of a fun exercise just to show how far functional programming concepts can be taken to encapsulate an entire system, and that system's thinking that it can actually include what you see, HTML and all those things. And one of the things that I've been doing here is trying to show examples with 0 libraries included as much as possible, just standard libraries. And if you can do that, then you can basically have everything inside an event store. If your CSS is embedded somehow, it's just a link to something that's out there, that should make the formatting a lot easier. But even then, you can just include it as part of one event, and then these projections can be things that are kind of done for you. And the other part of that is really on the right side, so adjusting the writing of events to check your invariants. So we talked about this in the meetup. I want to take that concept further and do that. I know Matt Bishop has been doing that as well, looking at the idea of event sourcing for a set of substreams versus an all stream only approach with very much configurable dynamic indexing for checking invariants by just having the code be sent through your command handler code, sent through as part of the request to save an event, which is a way to talk about a command really. But then have the internals of Event Store, or at least through a callback or something, to have that invariant be called and accepted based on indexes that are being built up internally by Event Store.
So if I understand correctly, basically you're saying push the logic of validating the invariant rules into the event store.
Correct. Yeah. Because right now all we have is the compare and swap stuff. Like, I'm expecting that this event's going to be event number 10. Oh, it's 11, so it gets rejected, right? That's kind of we have to the optimistic, pessimistic concurrency. But I'm taking that concept outside of just ordering within streams or global ordering. Those orderings are just indexes. And so if you take that index of like, here's an indexed way to get any email that's ever been added in an event, which could solve your registration problem that's always asked about in CQRS. But it could be done for anything.
I'm gonna play devil's advocate and just ask you some obvious questions. So
Sure,
kind
sure.
of clarify that. Just which is, other than a fun coding trick, why would I do that? What value would I get?
So what you're getting is a true representation, an accounting-like representation of what happened, because you're getting everything that made that event possible, which is actually the code that ran there. Now, yes, of course, you have that code in source control, but there's always that long sort of leap to go and look that up. So having the actual source code that was run for that one invariant to pass, right in the invariant that is the result of that passing, is it really shortens the life cycle of finding out problems or whatever. So
So if I hear you
but there's
correctly,
another one. There's another. That's one. That's one
so
thing.
for one, if I heard
But
you
the
correctly,
second. But wait, the second one
before you
is
go to
the
the second
fact that
one, I
we're
want
that
very
we're
correct.
just let me finish the second one. Um, so the second one is the fact that you're in CQRS and using an event store. You have the right side, which is storing your events. Then you wait for them to get published, and you update everything else on the other side, your projections, your read models, and then you get back to the UI. Um, so a lot of times that UI is not necessary, and it's really just a faceless processor that's or set of processors that are automations that are going. So why would you want to go all the way back across the network back to your application if that logic is actually sitting in the actual events? Then you would have an ability to keep that loop inside the one process of event store and get it all done much faster. Meanwhile, keeping very clear traceability of what happened. Your stack trace is really the series of invariants that ran and event handlers for projections that ran right there at source in the actual events themselves. So you can look at a correlation ID for what kicked something off. If you look at all of those, you actually have the data. So someone actually mentioned Steve P. That sounds like blockchain. Well, one particular blockchain, those digital contracts and with Ethereum kind of work that way too. That you kind of put the stuff in there, but there's nothing blockchainy about it. We've been sending dynamic execution code for a long time. The idea that a function is a piece of data is not a new concept. So yeah, I mean, the blockchains really isn't anything new. Just using old aspects to get network network consensus across the half the population or more. So not much different. So sorry, go ahead, Rick. Your questions and concerns. Did you have a question about the first one about having the invariant in the indexes? I guess not. You're not muted, but if you are muted, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I was muted.
Yeah.
My kid popped in and asked me a question. So,
Okay.
So why that? So the first one is about traceability, right? Which is why that command was accepted at the time, like the data. So you actually, instead of having to go back and you can basically, you have that forensic analysis. You can look and say, well, okay, at the time it passed for these reasons. This was the logic, and these were the things it looked up, right? And these are the values.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct? Is that correct?
Yeah, but you also see you don't actually need to see the values because you have the code there, and you have all the parameters going in at the top with with the command that was trying to be executed. So I guess what I'm saying is that you could expand event store to have an idea of like, don't just the API says try and store this event. I'm trying to say that there's another API call that could be there. Try and execute this command, and it's this event which contains the invariant it must check, and it has these other parameters that are going to be fed to the invariant along with whatever else. But usually they're one-to-one with the event models or with the event data, so that's optional.
So I have the code and parameters that were evaluated at the time that event was accepted, or when actually would I store? I guess I would guess that, or failed. I guess I'd get failed ones too,
No,
right?
well, I mean, you could extend it. I think just for the
Okay.
version one of this concept, I'm just gonna do, you know,
So you
I
don't
think
only
we're just
store.
gonna raise an error and return an error code
Okay.
to
Okay. I
whoever did
just
that. But I think you're right. If you want it to be all encompassed, you'd have to capture the
it's
capture the
fine.
failures, and with public facing websites that might be an issue, so you might have to have a way to not store certain events or have a way
Right.
to
So
clean and consolidate things.
okay. So basically, I want to store the code and logic, and the real reason that matters is because code changes over time,
Yep,
right? And
of
if you want
course.
to say why did that pass last year, you can't look at the code
Well, you
without looking
can,
at the
but
source
it
code.
takes
You got to go
effort.
back to your source code
Yeah,
repository, pull everything together.
yeah,
Whereas here, you can just like I have for that event, right, in context, not in this gobbledygook of code where I have to research. I can say this is the parameters that passed. I can see why it passed at that time, and I can see that's no longer the rules we apply, so we're good. Or hey, wait a minute, we do have the same rules. We should fix them. You can have those kind of quick decisions.
yeah, exactly. So people that have adopted event sourcing already have that huge benefit from just the pure data point of view, that they can tell, customer service reps can tell developer what's going on because they have the history of those events, and they can even point to a specific component that's causing an issue where there's undesirable output being given or something like that. And so this happened at one of the companies where one of our guys or three of our guys worked before, where once they put in event sourcing and CQRS, the customer service reps all of a sudden were part of basically solving all the technical problems. So imagine, like you're saying, this now takes it to the next level. So once the problem has been identified and the customer service rep says, hey, this thing's not working well, um, both of them can look at the code and it's like, hey, if a customer service rep understands the invariant code, they can say, yeah, you guys you had an equals greater than or equals, it should only be greater than. You have an off by one here.
I guess if I wanted to, really, I could look back and say we had a bug. Now, how many of those commands passed with that code signature? Well, those are the ones that I actually have to do a compensating action on if there's compensating action.
Mm-hmm.
Could get crazy on that, but just at least knowing.
Yeah, I mean, this is a first step. I mean, this. I think we're heading there. I know that there's a lot of effort at Event Store to work on the indexing. I think Chris Condren's doing a lot of indexing work for the internals of Event Store. So actually, last night at 11 at night, I was playing with the fork of Event Store just to fish out those places, and I found like 6 tests that Chris wrote for some of the indexing stuff.
So that's interesting. I just want to kind of, because I know we're getting short, I just want to make sure I understand the main points here
Mm-hmm.
and reiterate them back.
Mm-hmm.
And because that's actually, so the other one that you mentioned, and I think it's actually the third one you mentioned, I'm not sure I kind of caught the first one because someone popped in and asked me the second one. But basically, you talk about saving a network transaction because.
Well, yeah, network transmission, because there's a whole bunch of stuff that can just go round and round within Event Store itself.
Because basically that code is actually applied inside Event Store.
Yeah,
so
think of the projection side of Event Store.
All of the projections happen inside Event Store.
That's right.
I don't have to have this command. It's got to go do all these queries.
Yeah, think of a stored procedure. This is essentially what we had in stored procedures for RDBMS. However, the nice thing about it is that what you're doing is you're writing in actual, code. If you support JavaScript for your invariants and things like that, then you can actually have all the benefits of an IDE and all that. Whereas with a stored procedure, it was a nightmare. The productivity level was just not the same.
So it gets the performance benefits of a stored proc without actually leaving the logic stored in the database.
Well, it is kind of Lambda, and your processor isn't in the cloud, or if Event Store is in the cloud, then it is, I guess. But that's the same idea, right?
To understand, you're saying that when I execute the command, I'm passing in that logic with the command. So the command's not is the command stored in the database? The command logic, is that an event that the logic is changed, or is that actually the code?
So
The
some of
command
it is, yes, we have to. So if we look at it as a systems kind of thinking, everything's in this box. And if you actually want the pages that you're serving to a browser to be part of that event store, you're going to need to, how do you introduce a change to the way a page is going to appear? You're going to have an event, a meta event called change, login page layout. And there's just a simple subscription in the projection that has, this new, every time you look at that projection, it now has the new screen. So
I guess if you're pushing screens in there, but I'm just talking about if you're pushing commands in. That's the kind of thing that I was following, right?
yeah,
Things. If you're pushing screens in, that's a different beast than if you're just pushing.
well,
commands in
it is, no, because where does the command come from? And if you have nothing that's hosted, that's external, you have to seed it with a projection.
Right.
So it actually has to come from there. So what you're adding to the event store is some way to be able to have the idea of a processor in there, quote unquote processor. I don't like using that, but let's just say something that some sort. I like to call it automation. Those to-do lists, right? I want to build a to-do list executor into event store, and by doing that, you now have a place from where a command could come. If it's someone clicking on a button because they looked at the screen, that just comes in as a request on an API, right? To do something.
Okay, and I think then.
So there's an interesting thing. You probably don't want to go all the way to the client because then someone could put in their own nasty
Right.
code.
Yeah,
Or for now you do, so there might be another loop that you can only reference things that someone with privileges could put in, for how to orchestrate putting together one of these, please store this event with this invariant requests, right?
One of the ground rules of security is don't trust the client.
Well, of course, yeah. But I mean,
Anyway,
this is going to be an experiment, so we can you could elevate. The other thing I was thinking about, Rick, is that you can do this in stages. You can actually have all of this live just outside as a thin layer on top of Event Store for now, and do that. At least you're getting rid of the network traffic problem, and you have this living on the same box at least. So logically, it will do the same thing.
Now, the third basically saves the network transmission, acts like a stored proc kind of thing. The third one, I think I heard you say, if somebody was interrupting me while you were talking, so which is you can trace back side effect actions to the original event that triggered it. Is that what you said, or did I misunderstand? You know what I mean?
I mean, I guess it could be. I don't think I said it.
So I do an action, right?
Uh-huh.
And then that's going to do a command that will succeed. But then there's there's a rule that's listening to this, that trigger event. Is that traceability back? Why would this event? Well, it's actually traced back to that user originally did this, which created this, which created this. Is that part of what you said, or you said something about?
Oh yeah, so the idea of a correlation ID for things that get kicked off. Yeah, you could certainly bake in all of those good ideas about having these extra keys to tie things together, so that each event has its own ID and all this other stuff, commands and all that. But then you have something that allows you to trace through something that never made it back to the user because it had to go through a few cycles to kind of finish a long running workflow. And there you go. But there's some really cool things to look at this, because it starts to open up, all sorts of dials and tweaks as to, like, if you have something with 100 steps, do you want to, throttle that so everything else is, works properly. So the whole idea of like what a cluster of event store nodes does is really cool, because those things still hold true. Like, certain things will just need to present data. Most of the time they're read operations, but some of them are changing state, and that's where event store really shines, and that's where you want to do things. So imagine this concept now needs to coordinate with other with the other nodes in the cluster. And when you have a process that is doing 100 steps through this automation thing, do you make it lock step with one another, or do you let one just go crazy until it's done and then do the sync between the rest of the nodes? Do you make that an option? Some really cool, concepts could be explored in this, but in the end, it would be kind of nice to just have, hey, I have event store, and as long as I'm using basic HTML, CSS, with no fancy libraries, which I know everyone wants to pull in, but CSS and HTML is becoming incredibly powerful to get exactly what you want on the screen without, any kind of frameworks. So it's a viable solution, I think.
So yeah,
Especially at the academic level. I could see this in universities. If they taught this in university, make a systems thinking all-in-one event store application. That you could talk about state machines, you could talk about a whole bunch of things in that course, and have kind of a mathematically derived thing. And Jeremy Chessing has been doing a lot of this functional side where he just he doesn't even use the word CKRS. This is event sourcing. It's all projections, left folds, and that's all it is. I can define all these things. So he's done a ton of work in this area. But I think if we add this type of thing to university courses, it would be really cool. I think it would set people off to think about computing a lot better and make it more applicable to real world problems while still keeping the computer science aspect of it alive.
Right. So basically, so the third one was really about if you add things like correlation IDs, you can do stuff that manages long-running workflows.
Well, I don't think they're required. I think they're kind of nice to haves because.
Yeah, I said it's optional. You can do that with this, and then you can go further down the rabbit hole, which is push your CSS and all the web drawing processes right into there too.
Yeah.
And have a kind of a event store as your only.
Yeah, it's the only place for everything.
Only technology, right?
It's a true ledger. It has all that meta stuff, right? So
it gets meta, but basically it's kind of just taking this down. It's like, how far can we push this? Can we make this the only code processing?
Yeah. I don't know if you've taken Lisp or Scheme in university or college, but that idea that everything starts from almost nothing, just this idea of two brackets.
That's probably, that may not be like you're saying, that may not be a production practical thing, but it would be a good exercise and learning exercise, and you might discover a lot from it.
Yeah.
What I hear you saying. But
yeah, I think so. I think it's going to give people a better way to frame how they're going to evaluate which frameworks and libraries they're going to use. They're going to have a better idea of what the trade-offs are when they adopt things, and I think I think that would be a valuable education that would put people further ahead, rather than follow bad paths for 2 or 3, 4, 5 years, sometimes longer, rather than getting on the right track much earlier.
So for the people who think it's an idea, it's like, how far down the rabbit hole do they want to go? The 1, the 2, the 3, it kind of goes all the way
Well, I
down.
mean, there's production. There's production systems running on Haskell and all sorts of esoteric languages. So why the hell not? Why isn't there a production system that's running on Event Store only? My fork of Event Store that does this is something that I'm going to use.
No,
why not?
I get what you're saying. It's like, why? People ask why. It's like, why not? Why? Just because we can.
Do you understand JavaScript? Then you can modify what I have. I have a README that tells you how to put in a new, version of that page.
Right. So you basically have done right to this level with the HTML and everything in it. You've got a little the small example that you're.
I'm working on. I'm starting that. I made it one of my goals for the next little bit, to start diving into that. And I'm still up in I'm thinking of Event Store might be too big and too distracting to do that. So I have a one-pager Event Store that I have from 13 years ago or something like that. 12 years ago that I wrote in C Sharp. Just a single page of code that does essentially the job of an event store, and is simple enough to just show
Oh, does
the
it with
concepts.
unique IDs and everything for events and all that kind of
It
stuff?
has, yeah, global ordering, unique IDs, all that kind of stuff. And so that might be a better way to start experimenting with all this stuff.
Yeah, I think if you're basically you're doing this at first as an experiment, so you want to go, this is not going to be a production system, although you could replace with a production event store. But
Yeah.
if you're trying to do the lowest code possible thing, then you're going to say, okay, here it is, down principles. We're not using.
Well, if I'm going to go down that route to actually promote it as something that could run a production system, I would probably have it on, even though I'm using a simple implementation, just to be able to play with it and the concepts and understand it clearly, I would want it to be a separate kind of next layer above API layer that does all this, so that you could replace it with Event Store if you actually wanted to use this thing for production.
Yeah, that's what I said. Like, yeah, here I'm doing it with this, but then you could swap in.
Yeah.
I'm going to show that I can just as an exercise. I'm going to do this on this.
Yeah.
And then swap in event store. So
I'm really flip-flopping on this because it should be easy to have callbacks and hooks into anything to do this. So yeah, I could leave it as a API extra layer that does it, but then again, I'm like, why should it be hard for me to put on the hooks into regular event store to do the same thing instead, and have a plugin model or a fork that basically in the end all I'm doing is running event store. I'm not running my library that then requires event store, and I can swap it for the little one if I want to play around with the concept.
But I mean, you could refactor the API out later, couldn't you?
Yeah, no, this is highly component. Like the concepts that we're talking about are highly delineated. Like there's no real blurriness to the line. So the seams are there architecturally that you could do whatever and refactor from one to the other very quickly.
My essence, my recommendation would be is, if you start talking about forking event store, then it's probably not the time for that experiment, because you probably want to be able to show I can use the latest event store at any time, and until you actually start really using it, it's worth putting the hooks in. Until then, it's kind of like,
I have a funny story about that.
That's work that you don't have time for.
At active state,
it also makes it inaccessible for other people who, well, I'm using this version of event store now, I can't try your thing.
Okay, so I have a story about that because at active state, our product was built on it was a fork of Cloud Foundry, which is a huge open source project,
right?
Run by Pivotal and mostly and others, and so we had that exact problem, like which version are you using? But there it was like 1,000 moving pieces of log drains and this, that, and the other, and elastic scaling for nodes and on VMs versus Docker. So it was incredibly complex because of all the moving parts. I think this concept will work because Event Store just does two very simple things: ordered storage and make sure that it's on disk before you publish it. So that's all it does. Whereas Cloud Foundry and Pivotal was, look at Cloud Foundry and how many pieces are in there, and if you have all of that as your upstream, it's going to be a nightmare. And so we had to keep, it was hard to get people upgraded from one version to the next, like from Cloud Foundry 2 point whatever to the next version was impossible. We ended up just backporting features to the builds that worked on older on older versions and tags of the upstream. Whereas I think in this case it's not that big of a deal. It's literally 3, 4, 5 integration points, and those will always be the same integration points. Not like Event Store is going to have new features that I need to integrate with. Those features will be superfluous to what I'm doing with it.
Yeah,
right?
I think just starting the experiment with the API level and just going the whole experiment, and then decide, okay, I'm gonna push the hooks into Event Store.
Yeah.
If I like it enough, but honestly, what I'm saying is the thing you'll learn from having that API will change what you'll do lower level. So do the learning first.
Yeah,
And
I mean, there's something that's just drawing me into all the Paxos stuff and all the internals of Event Store that I want to swim in the code. So I actually want to just
fair
work
enough.
on the internals of Event Store myself because I don't really have a chance to do that. So I'm gonna do something for the meetup and the community. I might as well be a guinea pig for saying, hey, this is how easy it is to contribute to Event Store
Sure.
and keep it going. So that's just me. And maybe someone else will say, Adam, you're not making enough progress. I did what you're trying to do at the API layer, and I'm
I'm
like,
just
okay, fine, I'll just help you instead.
Yeah, I'm just kind of aware of what time you have, and that's my recommendation.
Well, with
Get
Chris
this.
Simpson's new to-do list thing, I'm actually getting a lot more things done. So once it goes out, I highly recommend anyone that's got ADHD or other concentration issues to try the app because he's done a ton of research on ADHD and all of these other things. And the project is event source too, so bonus. It has a full listing of everything you've done. There's always a little thing at the bottom to say history of this particular to-do task that's repeating, or here's your journal of everything you've done. He's already built in the little graph, so if you're using it for like tracking, how many, what your time was on your 2 kilometer run, you can start doing that. And the idea is that it's not something that just plugs into your watch automatically and says this is your steps today or whatever. It's having the bringing back your conscious effort to these things, and so that you're the one doing these things. You may get the data from your watch, but it'll be a to-do list. Do you want to add this amount of steps to this? It's like, it gives you that opportunity to reflect that, for like half the day I was actually washing windows, so those aren't steps. So he's done an excellent job, and I think it's certainly helping me to get through everything because now business has picked up, and I'm at this place where there's too many distractions jumping from one project to the next, and I'm pivoting so often that I'm making very little progress in each. and this actually does help quite a lot. So, but a really cool event sourced project. I actually have to go, unfortunately,
So do
because
I. I was about to say I have to jump off here.
yeah, I got it's the demos for one of our clients. I got to be there. I think it's already on its starting already, and I got to leave this office so my son can get back online with his friends.
All right.
So thanks everyone. If you have ideas for the next one, I'm gonna try and use my task tracker to keep ideas for the meetup in here, and so hopefully we'll see a lot more diversity and a lot more planned things, more guests, and the podcast should be back in swing soon too. So
Einar has some ideas that on using event modeling and through some examples, the business examples he's done that might be worth doing one time.
yeah, I saw his post. Yeah, so it would be good to talk to him when he's back. I'm sure everyone's just doing their vacation things at this point, and so I'm surprised you're here, but that's good. People are back, sort of.
Sort of.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. I'll see you next week. I think I'm going to do the podcast on Monday, and then next Friday I hope to jump into some of this cool code. And yeah, so stay tuned for that. Have a great weekend, everyone. Bye.
Cheers.